What's up, world? What's going on? It's your boy, the author. Right back at that ass again. Here's another one. What's going on? Just want to make this brief video, man. Want to make this in regards to the Cosby situation with Bill Cosby. First and foremost, man, I don't know anything about Hollywood. Not sure if I thought that I knew until the internet came out. I've been hearing things about devil worship and people sacrificing their children to make it in Hollywood, to make it to have success. Been hearing about various strange things in terms. And I usually didn't believe it, about the devil worshiping and all that stuff, but a lot of strange things happen in Hollywood. Like every time someone gets famous, either their bodyguard will die or one of their relatives will die. I'm not sure if some of the Hollywood actors or actresses or sports, phenomenal players, the NBA athletes, things of that nature. Not sure if they're feds either or what's the situation there. But one thing I want to point out, man, with the Bill Cosby situation, it was a little special. And this is the reason why I'm speaking on it, because as a kid growing up, man, I didn't have a father like a lot of black males and females in Generation X. Did have a grandfather, but me and him, we were not very close. And then I've mentioned it before that I did have a grandfather, but at the same time, having a grandfather, and I'll make a video probably on this topic as well, but having a grandfather doesn't suffice for not having a father. And I was speaking with someone today on Facebook about that. When the guy responded that the female will be okay because even though the female was a single parent, the single parent posted this comment on Facebook, and he said, and she was talking about not having a father for her children, and he said she'd be okay because she did have her father, so the kids would have a grandfather. Having a grandfather isn't a good replacement for a father, because even if you are close with your grandfather can't get behind your kids the way you can. In other words, they're older. They don't have the energy. Grandparents are who you see on weekends typically. And they're the good. They can play the good guys because you typically have your parents. My situation was different because my grandparents had to help raise me. Which I appreciate them doing, because so even though my grandfather wasn't much, he did. It was still a male in the household, and even though it didn't suffice for having a father because he couldn't get behind me like a real father could, it was better than not having anything at all, and I do recognize that. But still, I was a product of a single parent home because my mother never was married. But this is more about the Cosby. So to make a long story short, the reason why Bill Cosby was really influential in a lot of kids' lives, especially for Generation X, because the Cosby Show came on in the 80s, and Bill Cosby had a family-oriented show, very clean. I think the Cosby Show started off in like 84. Early 80s. It lasted, I think, at least 6 seasons. It went for a long time. Used to come on every Thursday. And every day, you see Bill and his wife, Claire Huxtable. The character that he played was Mr. Huxtable. And you had his daughter, Rudy, and she turned out to be a star as well. I think her name was Felicia Rashad or something like that. But yeah, so she was a part of the show as well. So you saw the Cosbys, man, and that's the only way I saw that's the only family that I would see, that I would see at all, actually, was his family on TV. My family, it seemed like, we were at odds. Like my mother was pretty much staying with her parents. We lived upstairs, they lived downstairs. It was that big barrier there, so we weren't really a family. Their family was always together. They had a typical, normal, functioning family. And every day, or every week, because it came on once a week, this is when TV was still worth a shit. And you didn't have all these Netflixes and all these, the internet wasn't even out yet. Internet didn't start getting huge until like around 2000s, right? For regular people. But my point is, every week, every Thursday, Bill would wear a new shirt, like a sweater, and then it would have a college on it. He'll sometimes have Temple University, Morehouse University. So he was a big advocate for college, things of that nature. And he also came out. It was a spinoff of that show called "It's a Different World," and I think the daughter, he had a light skinned daughter named Denise, and she played in it, and It's a Different World. And now some people were opposed to the Cosby Show because they said, well, most black households weren't like that, and then they wanted a TV show that mimicked real life, what was really happening in black households. But I think, especially during the 80s, during that time where you had that crack epidemic, that was a breath of fresh air for a lot of blacks, well-to-do, especially the ones who are lower middle class, wanting to step up to middle class, because that was the only time you saw a family that was together, that was functional. Mr. Cosby played a doctor, his wife played a lawyer, and he was a big advocate for college, and that's the only way I thought I should go to college, because of Bill Cosby, because he was always promoting colleges. All the kids, they were going to go to college. He talked about college a lot. College was always wrapped up into the storyline. And then he had It's a Different World, which showed nothing but, blacks going to college. He was promoting black colleges. So even though my grandfather dropped out of school in the third grade to help his family on the farm, my grandmother dropped out in the ninth grade, and that was more not because they were so much bad, but because back in their days you had to drop out to help the family on the farm. So even though my grandparents, they were hard workers, but they were high school dropouts. Even though my mother barely graduated high school, and even though I was from the inner city of Rochester, New York, I still felt that I should go to college and get a 4-year degree, mainly because of the Cosby Show and It's a Different World. That's what gave me my spark to want to go, even though I didn't go to college directly after high school. But my point is that Bill Cosby, or Dr. Cosby, was convicted of sexual assault charges, I believe earlier this week, probably I think no last week, and I don't understand what happened, because it seemed like the first time he was accused, they said he didn't do it. Second time, they came back around, and like my man said, they doubled back and got him. Second time, then they said he was guilty of sexual assault charges on 30-some women plus, from all the way from the 70s, which is something I never heard of during his height of popularity in the 80s or in the 90s. And a few comedians spoke out about the topic. I forgot. I think it was Eddie or some comedian spoke out about it. But they were talking about, the females were talking about Bill slipped them Quaaludes in the 70s, and this guy, he said he remembered the 70s. He said in the 70s it was a different time. He said you went to the disco, there was a line of coke on a table, you sniffed the coke, and if you take coke, your heart starts beating fast, so you'll take the Quaalude back then to slow your heart rate. And he was saying, so if the ladies weren't interested in him, why would they go with him to a room or to the room? And he was openly married. So, I mean, my thing is, man, I've heard these fake accusations growing up. They said Mike Tyson They accused him of raping this black female in this beauty pageant. The Tupac situation. It seems like Hollywood is very good at trying to make black men look like rapists and things of that nature. But, statistics show that we aren't the primary ones that are doing the raping. So, I don't believe it. It's like the brother was saying, it's kind of like saying accusing someone of raping you in the 70s in 2018. It's kind of like saying, accusing somebody of robbing your house in 1984. And you coming to the cops now saying, yeah, that person robbed my house in 1984. He did it. Arrest him. It's like, man, the man is 80 some odd years old. It's like, and then the females came out of the courtroom like they were so happy, pretending to cry, even though the ones who were acting like they were crying, you didn't see not one. If you really look at the video, you don't see not one actual tear go down their cheek. But I just believe not, and I'm all conspiracy theory, talk aside. I don't know Bill Cosby. I know the image he portrayed was a positive image, and it was a spark that led me to get my 3 degrees. But my thing is, man, it's just like no matter, Hollywood is not good for the black man. Period. I don't believe so. U.S. is dangerous enough, but Hollywood is not good for the black man. And I was going to make another video about the Kanye West situation. But Hollywood is not good for the black man. And they were saying he was trying to buy NBC since the 80s, and I remember that, and they kept telling him no. And we should take some of these lessons too, man. When we have our own businesses, we shouldn't try, so hard to sell them out. If they buy us out, fine. Because a lot of times too, what they'll do, they'll build up pressure. A lot of black communities were ruined because just like in Durham, North Carolina, they had a lot of brothers and a lot of black families had a lot of businesses on certain streets, and they broke up those communities by building a highway, having a highway go through the community. And then what would happen was they bring the whites in, rebuild up those same communities that blacks had already made profitable. Take those over, and now if you go to Durham, some of those you'll see different various businesses down there, billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies. Those were built above the remnants of what was left over when they pushed the black community outside of Durham. And they don't mention stuff like that because that doesn't really tie into the whole tie into the whole, what are the words I'm looking for? Tie into the whole premise or the whole story line, whereas, blacks aren't getting ahead because they're lazy or because they just don't want to do. Because if you tell the whole story, God forbid you expose it, America will expose itself as being saboteurs or, the real sabotage, the real enemies of, the black man and his family. So, you can't tell the whole narrative. You have to say, oh, well, they're not getting ahead because they're lazy. You're not going to say, at one time these people had the most profitable businesses in the U.S. and you had to build highways through the community so you could stop these people. The same thing they did with Malachi York in the 90s, where he had a whole community. He had like 400 acres of land in Atlanta, and they tried to get him on rape charges. That didn't work. So they had some detectives storm his property, make a lot of false arrests, take people to court, coerce people to tell stories and to create false narratives. That's the word I was looking for earlier. To create false narratives or to create a false narrative, making it seem like Malachi York molested kids. And then they end up doing what they really wanted to do the whole time. They ended up seizing the property. So that's what America does, man. But yeah, my point is the Cosby, the whole Cosby situation is, to me, it's just a farce. You know, you got an 80-something-year-old man on trial. Talking about he may face 10 to 15 years in prison or 30 years in prison. He's 80, man. He doesn't have 30 years in him. But I don't know if it's that Hollywood, he's not doing what Hollywood wants him to do, or uh, there's various rumors. They said he said certain things against Trump before he ran. Um, you know, and at one point he took a real conservative view on the black community. He didn't like the way the black community was operating, but sometimes conservative blacks forget the other elements that are involved in that, because poverty breeds dysfunction. So we should clarify that. But the big thing in this country is to beat up the victims. Like I said, I know the black community is not perfect. No community is perfect. My biggest thing is we don't try to stick together with each other. But I do understand that there is a poison and a sickness in the race. But just to make it seem like the only problem is blacks are being lazy, that's a stupid racist perspective to take. And so we'll say, yeah, you guys make up a lot of the crime. A lot of black males take a huge role in creating the crime. But when the Italians first came over here with the bootlegging, they did a tremendous amount of killing as well. So did the Irish did a lot of killing, especially in Manhattan and other areas that they don't tell you about. And ultimately, it's more white on white crime than black on black crime, because they are the bigger, majority here in the United States. But I just want to touch on that point, man. But the Cosby situation, I just want to speak on that. The Cosby Show was still a positive show. I really enjoyed watching it growing up as a kid. And I'm so thankful that I grew up with that as my primary television program, because now that I'm older, they have silly shows like Meet the Browns and all this nonsense. The lineup for TV has become a farce, but that was a show that actually was a positive show. And it was only at that time, that was the only black show, I think, of the 80s, I would say. Because you didn't start to see, and that broke a lot of ground, because you didn't start to see, quote unquote, black shows until the 90s, where Fresh Prince came out with the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. In the 90s, you had Martin, and then you had In Living Single with Queen Latifah. So the 90s, and then you had a lot of black movies and cinema like Boys in the Hood, Dead Presidents, and things of that nature, New Jack City, things of that nature. But in the 80s, that was one of the only shows you had. Good Times was pretty much in the 70s, and so was Sanford and Son. But Cosby was one of the first black shows that actually had some substance, in terms of, it wasn't just a slapstick, funny, ha 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 show, but it also was inspiration. Because Sanford and Son was cool, it was very funny, but it was about a black man that had his own junkyard. Many of us don't aspire to be junk collectors, but one good thing about that we overlooked is he did have his own business, which I think, whether you own a hot dog stand or a junkyard, we should try to own our own businesses. And then you had the Jeffersons, where it was real funny, but Mr. Jefferson owned laundromats. So that was that. That was but they the show, when you knew that Sanford and Son owned the junkyard, and he sold things he collected. You knew that the Jeffersons, Mr. Jefferson owned the laundromats, but they didn't get real deep into that. That never played in the storyline, and they never encouraged blacks They never had storylines that encouraged blacks to do the same thing. You know, and before that, you had Good Times where blacks just lived in the projects. So, but the Cosby Show was the first, I would say, real black show that was influential. And even though Cosby wasn't the owner of anything, it told you to go to college and things of that nature. I wish more of an ownership element had been a part of the show, but it was still a positive show. But I just think that ultimately that he is innocent, and there's another sad case of pointing the finger, man. I don't believe the story of any of those females. I believe if they they had sex with Mr. Cosby, but I believe it was consensual. And then it's a shame that you have females that can point the finger 20 years later and say they were raped after consensual sex. If a man did that, it would be laughable. But it just shows the farce of feminism. But yeah, leave your comments below, man. If you grew up watching the Cosbys, leave your comment below. If you want to talk about your favorite Cosby show or what you thought about the trial, if you followed the Cosby case, the first and second trial. But I just want to touch base on that, man. All right, and y'all take care.